In this episode of B.Hooked Crochet, we're going to make the Coziest Crochet Cardigan from Yarnspirations. My name is Brittany, and I'll be your guide throughout this tutorial. For the supplies list and written instructions, please visit bhookedcrochet.com/cardigan. That's going to give you all the information you need to get this free pattern from Yarnspirations. Let's go ahead and begin. First things first, whenever you're going to be crocheting some type of clothing, I know it's really tempting to just dive right in because it's exciting and you want to start working on it. But it's really important that we slow down, take a look at the pattern so we can get this sizing correct. I mean, the last thing you want to do is spend countless hours crocheting some type of piece of clothing, in this case, the Coziest Crochet Cardigan, and it doesn't fit. That's like a worst case scenario. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the pattern. If you haven't done so already, I encourage you to go to yarnspirations.com. You'll just type in the Coziest Crochet Cardigan and download this pattern. It's a free pattern. It has all the information here that you need to know. I want to point out a couple of things first. We're going to talk about the colors that we have listed in the pattern because in some cases, you might want to substitute and use different colors than what they have listed here. And that's perfectly fine, but you do need to keep track of your colors so that way you have consistency throughout your project. And the other thing we want to keep in mind is the sizing. This is always what trips people up when it comes to crocheting clothing from a written pattern. It can be a little bit confusing if you've never looked at these sizings, and if you're printing in black and white like a lot of people might be doing, our sizing codes here are in color, so you'll have to do a little bit of extra work if you are printing in black and white in order to know which set of instructions are going to directly relate to you based on the size that you're creating. So the first thing I want to point out is the colors. So in the tutorial, we're going to be using these same colors that are listed here, but you can absolutely substitute whatever colors you want. You just want to keep track of them. So what I would recommend doing is on your pattern or just off in the margins here, honestly, you have a little bit more room down here, just write out color A and the color that it is, color B, color C, color D, and write out the colors. That way you know you can just kind of cross this section out and not have to worry about getting confused about which colors you need to use. So we're going to be transitioning colors a lot in this pattern. So that's the first tip. The second tip is about the sizing. You first want to take a moment to figure out what size you need to create. This information right here, so extra small, small, and medium, these are the number of skeins that you're going to need to crochet this size. Same here, so you'll need just a little bit more, and then for 3x, 4x, and 5XL, these are the number of balls of yarn that you're going to need here. So you've probably already taken care of this part already. In order to figure out what size you need to create, we need to pay attention to this section here. So these are the measurements. You'll want to just take a quick measurement. These are bust measurements, and this is going to determine which size you need to create. Once you have figured out what size you need to create, you're ready to dive into the tutorial. I will make some references to the different sizing throughout as we go through these different rounds, and don't be fooled by how much text is in this pattern. It looks really confusing. It looks super overwhelming, but it's actually not. It's pretty easy once you get the hang of it. I will be making references wherever you see these sizes here. So these are the only parts where you're going to make some kind of variation in the sizing based on which size you're creating. So what I would recommend that you do at this point is circle the size that you're going to create. So I will be working on the small size. So I'm going to focus in on this number here. But if you're creating the large or one of the extra larges, You're just going to focus in on these other numbers. Okay, just circle them now. You don't have to think about it later. I will also draw your attention to the last page of the pattern here, which is the diagram. If you're familiar with working with diagrams, I highly recommend that you just go straight to the diagram rather than reading the instructions. I mean, you can of course use the instructions for reference, but this is going to be the ticket. It's going to be the easiest way for you to crochet each one of these squares. Now we will also refer to the assembly diagram later on in the video tutorial once we get to that point. This is going to be a complete step-by-step from start to finish. We're going to have a segment on how to crochet the square and then the assembly. So we'll do the assembly for part 1, the assembly for part 2, and we'll cover that ribbing as well. So grab your crochet hooks, get your pattern, let's begin. The first thing that we need to do is crochet our motifs. So we're going to be making 4 of these in order to create our cardigan, and we're going to start off with color A. So for me, color A is this gray. So you'll just grab your color A, make a slip knot, and we're going to begin the round by chaining 2. Now this chain 2, we're not counting either of these as a stitch. The first chain that we created right next to the slip knot is going to be the foundation of our circle. So that's how we're going to turn this into a circle. We want to make 16 single crochets into that first chain. This is a very standard way of starting a crocheted round without having to use a magic ring, which is not super user friendly, and without making a large hole. So if you use multiple chains and join and then work your stitches in the circle there, you typically will have a larger opening, and we don't want that. As you work your single crochets into that first chain, you're eventually going to get to the point where you've worked all the way around, but you still have to add more single crochets. And what I do in that case is just shift the stitches over, kind of squish them together, make some more room for the remainder. Once you've finished up round 1, you have 16 single crochets. What we want to do is just hold things here. We're going to find our first single crochet that we made. So this here is actually the chain from where we did our chain 2. So I don't want to work into there. I want to find my first stitch and just put my hook in that stitch. Okay, just catch both of those loops. And then you'll grab your color B and go ahead and create a slip knot with color B. I like to make a slip knot when I do my color transitions because it just gives you a little extra security. And so what you'll do is place that loop on your hook, pull it through the stitch, and then through the loop on your hook. If you haven't done so already, you'll need to break color A, so just trim that off, leave yourself a little bit of a tail so that you can work over those tails. Now we're not able to carry our yarn through this pattern because we're making long color transitions, so we're not going to come back to the gray for 3 more rows or rounds. So the best way to tackle this, instead of having to weave in hundreds of ends at the end of every square, we're going to work over them. So I just grab those 2 ends and just steady them in my fingers and work over them. To begin round 2, we're going to start by chaining 4. And this chain 4 is going to act as a double crochet, so 3 of those are a double crochet, and then a chain 1. That's going to be our repeat for this round. What we want to do is locate our next stitch, which is right here, work a double crochet into that stitch, And you can see I'm just leaving those tails right next to it so I can just work my stitch over top of them. So make your double crochet and chain 1. Then find your next stitch and double crochet into that and chain 1. And that's our repeat. It's really simple for round 2. You'll just repeat that for every one of your single crochet stitches. So that means we're going to have a total of 16 double crochets, including this chain. Now once we've made it to the end of round 2, you'll just want to double check, make sure you have 16 double crochets all the way around. When you work your last double crochet, you want to make sure you chain 1. That's part of our pattern repeat. We need to have a chain in between every double crochet. Once you do that, we're going to join on color C. Now we want to do that by locating our third chain. So I have my first chain all the way down here, second and third. Insert your hook into that third chain and just hold it there. Then pick up color C and make your slip knot. Place that loop on your hook. Pull it through the chain and through the loop on your hook. So that finishes off round 2, gets us set up for round 3 with our new color. All we need to do is just trim off our color B, and we're ready to begin round 3. Round 3, we're going to begin with 5 chains. And this 5 chains is going to count as a half double crochet and 3 chains. The first thing we want to do is half double crochet into the same space that our chain is coming from. So in that same stitch, and I'm working over my tails again in the back, and work a half double crochet. Then we're going to find that chain 1 gap space that's right next to it and half double crochet there. Then we're going to find the next double crochet and we're going to half double crochet into that stitch. Then we'll find the next chain space and half double crochet there. Now what we're doing in round 3 is we're changing the shape. So right now we have a circle, and we're going to be changing the shape just a little bit, and we're going to do so by creating little points. And we're going to start that next. So our next double crochet is what we need to focus our attention. We're going to half double crochet into that stitch. Then we're going to chain 3 and half double crochet into the same stitch. Now that's our repeat for this round. We'll go through it one more time, and we're just going to repeat this sequence of stitches until we've reached the other side. So we'll locate our next chain 1 gap space. We're going to make a half double crochet there. Then half double crochet into the next stitch. And half double crochet into the next chain 1 gap space. And then we're going to create one of these little points. So we'll find our next stitch, half double crochet, chain 3, and half double crochet into the same stitch. Now just repeat that until you've reached the beginning of your round. Once you've made it to the end of round 3, you should end up with 8 of these little points. And what happens here is on your last few stitches, you end up with your your 3 half double crochets that are in between those points, and that's exactly what we want. To move forward, what we need to do is join with the slip stitch to finish off this round. We're going to do so with color D, so you'll have that ready. We need to locate the chain that we're supposed to slip stitch into. It's the 3rd chain from that beginning 5. So here's the beginning 5 that we had, and we're going to join with the slip stitch to the 3rd chain. So you can see I have my 1st chain right here, 2nd chain, and then 3rd. So just insert your hook into the 3rd chain, leave it there, grab color D, and we're working these transitions just like we did before. Place that loop on your hook, pull it through the chain and through the loop on your hook. At this point, we're ready to start round 4, and this one is a little bit more involved. We're going to be working with our clustered stitches. It's really not as difficult as it sounds. The way we ended things, we have our slip stitch into our 3rd chain, and the instructions say that we're going to join color D in any of the chain 3 gap spaces. I feel like this is a slightly easier way of doing it, just joining and then just make a slip stitch immediately into that chain 3 space. Now we're set up and ready to begin our first few stitches. Now once we've made that slip stitch, we're just going to chain 1, and then we're going to work a single crochet and chain 1 and work a single crochet all into that same chain 3 gap space. Now from here we can chain 3, and here's where we're going to start our cluster. We're going to work our cluster over these 5 half double crochets. So from our chain 3, we're going to yarn over, just insert your hook into the first half double crochet. So you want to be careful with this because it's coming off of an edge here. So you want to count, you have 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's going to throw things off. So if you're just counting from this V right here, which is where it looks like the first stitch is, you're going to run into trouble. What you want to do is locate the V. It almost looks like a chain. That's actually your first half double crochet. You're going to insert your hook into that stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through 2. Now just yarn over, insert your hook into the next stitch, do the same thing. And we're just keeping these loops on our hook. Repeat for the next stitch. And again, in that 4th half double crochet. And one more time into the last half double crochet. So now at this point we have 5 partial stitches that are on our hook. We're going to yarn over, we'll pull through all of the loops on our hook. Now at this point we've finished up that cluster. We're going to chain 3. We're starting our repeat now. Then we're going to locate that next chain 3 space. We're going to work a single crochet into that space, chain 1, and single crochet in the same space. Now chain 3, and we're going to work another cluster over this section of half double crochets. So this part's actually the same. We've already worked part of our repeat here, but we're just going through it a second time. Locate your first half double crochet and start your cluster in that stitch. Now, one little tip that I have found, when you're working these clusters, it's better to have slightly loose tension. It will help the square lay a little bit flatter in the long run if you do that. So I'm just working them a little looser than I normally would. Finish off the cluster and repeat. So chain 3, and then you'll do your single crochet, chain 1, and single crochet into that next space. So what I need for you to do at this point is finish up round 4, following this repeat that we've just covered. We'll meet back up at the end of the round. So once you've made it back to the beginning of your round, your motif should now look something like this. We've changed shapes completely from how we started. We want to make sure that we ended off with our cluster and our chain 3. And now we just need to locate our first single crochet. So we're ignoring that chain 1. Remember when we first joined, we chained 1 and then we made a single crochet? Well, that chain 1 isn't counting as a stitch. So we just want to join with a slip stitch to our first single crochet, which for me is right here. And here we can go ahead and just fasten off this color. We're going to join our next color in a different space than we're located right here. So we can just go ahead and fasten off. I'm just going to pull that strand through the loop on my hook, and we're ready to begin round 5. To begin round 5, what we need to do is locate the chain 3 gap spaces from the 3rd round. Now we're going to be focusing in on this little section here, so they're pretty easy to spot. You can see all of those little holes. We're going to join to this area with color A to begin round 5. And what I'm going to do is just start where I stopped from round 4. So you'll make your slip knot. Just place your hook inside that gap space. And you're just going to join on just like that. Now what we want to do for this round, we're going to be working with treble crochets. So we need to chain 4. Now this chain is going to count as a treble crochet. Again, I'm just going to work over my tail in the background. Now the rest of our stitches are going to be worked in that chain 1 space in between our 2 single crochets. So once you locate that opening, you'll make a total of 4 more treble crochets, because we want to have 5 total for each one of these little groups that we'll be working. And since that chain is counting as 1, we'll just wrap up this little section with 4 more. Now what we're going to do from here is we're going to locate our next clustered stitch, and we want to single crochet into the top of that. So you can see that opening, that little stitch right there. You'll make a single crochet. And then we're going to jump over here till we see this group here where we have the single crochet, the chain 1, and the single crochet. We want to make a total of 5 treble crochets in that gap space. And that's our repeat for this round. We're going to locate the next cluster, make a single crochet into that stitch, and then 5 treble crochets in between these single crochets, so in that chain 1 gap space. And that's your repeat for the round. So just go ahead and finish crocheting round 5, and we'll talk about how to join. We're going to be switching colors again, so you want to keep that in mind. And finish that up. We'll meet back up on the other side. When you've made it to the end of round 5, you're going to stop when you have a single crochet in that last cluster. And we're going to join with color B in that same method that we were doing previously. So what we want to do is locate our 4th chain. So this is where I slip stitched onto the motif here. So we're not counting that. We have 1, 2, 3, and 4. I just want to insert my hook into that 4th chain. We'll leave that there. And then of course, join with a slip knot. All right, and that is going to finish up round 5. We can go ahead and trim off our color A, and we're ready to begin round 6. Now for round 6, what we're going to do is turn what we have here, so kind of like a flower shape, sort of a circle. We're going to turn this into a square now with this round. And what we want to do is we need to start in the middle of this group of stitches that we have here. So we're in our chain right now. What we want to do is make a slip stitch into the next treble crochet, and then we'll slip stitch into the next stitch. So this gets us to the middle stitch of this group of 5. And we're going to chain 1, and this is not going to count as a single crochet. Now this chain 1 is not counting as a stitch, so because of that, we're going to single crochet in the same space, and this is going to be the first stitch of our round. Now we're going to locate our next 2 stitches. Those are treble crochets, and we're just going to make a single crochet into each one of those. What we're working on here is the side of the square. So we're just working down the side, and then we'll get to one of the corners. So our next stitch is that single crochet. We're going to make a single crochet there, and then single crochet into each of the next 3 trebles. Now that finishes up all the stitches that are on the side of our square. Now we're going to focus on the corner. We're going to skip ahead over these 2 treble crochets. We're just going to skip those, and we're going to start working our corner into that single crochet stitch right here. We want to begin that by making 2 treble crochets, then we're going to make 2 double crochets, all in that same space. Then we'll chain 3, that's going to be the point, and then just kind of rotate your work a little bit. Work 2 double crochets into the same space. And then 2 treble crochets. Now that will finish up the corner. You may want to practice a little bit with these treble crochet stitches. If you have a loose top, like if your stitch is loose here up at the top, then on the next round you're going to have a little bit of a gap in that space. So you do want to try to crochet the treble crochets as tightly as you can without being so tight that it distorts the shape of your square. So it's going to be a little bit of trial and error involved here. I'm not going to lie. It's pretty easy though once you get the hang of it. Now we're going to skip over the next 2 treble crochets. We're always going to skip these and then start your single crochet in that 3rd stitch. And this is going to start the next side. We're always going to have 7 single crochets in a row. So we have 1 and 2 and 3. Then work in that single crochet is 4. And then single crochet into the next 3, 6, and 7. So you can just count those. It's easier really than to try to focus on what stitches you're working into. Just count them. And then we're going to skip these 2 and then work our next corner in this single crochet stitch. Now this is going to be worked the same way. So you'll have your 2 trebles, then 2 doubles, chain 3 for the point, then 2 more doubles, and 2 trebles. Then to start off your next side, you'll skip these next 2 treble crochets. You'll single crochet into that 3rd. And that's your repeat for this round. Go ahead and finish up the rest of your square. We'll meet back up on the other side. We're going to do another color transition, and I'm going to show you exactly where we need to do that. And once you've made it to the end of your round, so what I have here is I finished my last corner. I'm going to not do anything with these slip stitches where we had to kind of jump over to this 3rd stitch here. I want to locate that first single crochet that I made. So not the chain. Remember we said that doesn't count as a stitch, but find your first single crochet. Just put your hook into that. And we're going to join on color C, just like we've been doing. Now once you have trimmed off your color B and we've joined on color C, it's always a good idea to just go ahead and tie these in a knot. Since we're making so many color transitions, I mean, we're working over these so they're pretty secure, but if you want a little extra peace of mind, I would just tie them in a quick knot, and then you can just not have to worry about whether it's going to come apart or not. Round 7 is really one of the easiest rounds that we're going to be working with, at least up to this point. I'm just situating my ends here. I'm going to work over them. We're going to start by chaining 3. And this chain 3 is counting as a double crochet, so we are counting this as a stitch. And this round is so simple. All we're going to do is make 1 double crochet into each stitch along the side until we get to the point here. The most tricky part about this round is figuring out where to put our next stitch. We don't want to put a double crochet into the same stitch that we joined. If we did, we would be increasing a stitch. So that is this one right here. I can see that because I have my yarn is coming from that V. So I know I want to avoid that one. I'm going to make a double crochet into the next stitch. And then I'm just going to work over my ends here and make 1 double crochet until I get to the point. Now to make sure you're on track, We want to have a total of 11 stitches until that's going to get us to this point here. So it's a good idea to just go ahead and count, since it is a little tricky to figure out where that next stitch is. Including this chain, you should have 11 double crochets to get you to the point. Now from here, the way we're going to treat each of the corners is we're going to make 3 double crochets. We're just working in that chain space. And then chain 1, rotate, and then 3 more double crochets in that space. Now all we're going to do is repeat that. We're going to make 1 double crochet into each stitch until we get to the next point. We'll do our 3 double crochets, chain 1, 3 double crochets. Before we just dive into that, I want to bring to your attention the first stitch that we're going to work into for this side. Now this stitch can sometimes get covered up in our points. So if you work your double crochets all the way up to the edge here, then you might have this stitch covered up, and that's going to throw things off. It's going to throw off your final count for each row, and that's going to cause problems later on in the pattern. So you want to make sure you are really focusing in on this stitch here and finding the proper place, the V, to work your first stitch of the row. So once you get that squared away, you will have a total of 21 stitches on each side. So that's going to include these 3 that we made here. It's going to include the 3 that we'll make over in this point. Now once you've made it to the end of your round, you're not going to place a double crochet in the same stitch with your chain, because that counts as a stitch. We're going to finish things off by joining with the slip stitch to that 3rd chain. And we're not going to join on our new color here because we're going to do so in the corners for the next round. So just go ahead and fasten off. And then get color D ready. And that's what we're going to work with for round 8. So for round 8, we're going to begin with color D. And we're going to fasten on in our chain 1 space in the corner here. Now we'll make 6 chains. So we'll go ahead and count that as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And what this counts as is a double crochet. So 3 chains are double crochet. 3 chains are going to be a chain 3 gap space. We're going to go ahead and make 3 double crochets into the same space. And we're going to start working now in that traditional granny pattern. So we're going to be doing groups of 3 double crochets. We're going to skip some, and we're going to do that throughout this entire round. We're going to maintain the square shape, so that's where we have our corners here. We want to proceed by chaining 1. We're going to skip 2 double crochets. So we'll skip these first 2, and then we're going to work 3 double crochets in the next. That's how we're going to start off the row after coming off a corner. So we want to keep that in mind. And then we'll chain 1. We're always going to chain 1 in between the groups. So now we're going to skip 3 stitches. So 1, 2, and 3. We'll make 3 double crochets into the 4th. And then we're going to repeat that until we get to the next corner. So we're going to continue working in this pattern along the side. So chain 1, skip 3 stitches, and then make 3 double crochets in the next. Now if you've been doing everything correctly, you should end up with 2 stitches remaining before you get to the corner. So you'll skip those 2, you'll go ahead and chain 1, and then make 3 double crochets into the point. So in that chain 1 gap space, then you'll chain 3, and then rotate and make 3 double crochets in the same space. Now you'll chain 1, you'll just skip 2 here, so we'll skip these 2, and then we'll make 3 double crochets into the next. And that is our repeat for this round. And once you've made it to the end of round 8, you should end up with 2 double crochets in between where we started. So I have my group of 3 here. I'm going to chain 1. I need to finish off this corner though. This chain 6 that we had, 3 of those chains counted as 1 double crochet. What we need to do is make 2 more double crochets in that space. Then what we're going to do from here is we're going to join color A, and we're going to join with a slip stitch to the 3rd chain that we have here. So we'll count 1, 2, and 3. We're going to join here, so we'll just insert our hook there and then add color A. Now for round 9, this is going to be the last round that we cover here in the tutorial, because from here on out it's going to be a repeat of the same row, and we're going to alternate our same color pattern. So A, B, C, D, and then go back to A, B, C, D. We're going to continue on this traditional granny stitch pattern. The point that we're at now, we joined with a slip stitch to our 3rd chain, and we need to start within the chain rather than where we are right here. So to begin round 9, what we need to do is just slip stitch into the chain space. And now everything else from here on out is basically the same, with the exception that we're going to be working our groups in these chain spaces. So we'll chain 6, 3 of those counting as a double crochet, the other 3 as the corner. We're just going to turn our square over, work our first group of 3 double crochets in that same space. This is going to be part of our corner, and we'll finish this corner up once we've reached the beginning of our round again. So we'll chain 1, jump over to the next group, or the next chain 1 space. Make 3 double crochets there. And you'll do that until you reach the corner. Chain 1, skip over the next group, 3 double crochets in that chain space. When you've reached your corner, you want to make sure you have your chain 1, and then you'll do a group of 3 double crochets. And then chain 3 for the point. And then another group of 3 double crochets. And that's our pattern repeat for round 9. Go ahead and finish crocheting the other 3 sides of your square. And when you've made it to the end of round 9, you just want to make sure you have your chain in between before we finish off this corner. So we'll do so by making 2 double crochets into that chain space. And again, we're going to join with a slip stitch to that 3rd chain. This time we're going to do so with color B, and that's going to get us set up for round 10. Let's talk about what we need to do for round 10 and how we're going to finish up our motifs and move on to the rest of the pattern. What we need to do from here in order to finish up our motif, we've covered all of the complicated part of the design, and now we're just going to be repeating that 9th round until our motif reaches a certain measurement. That measurement is going to be dependent on the size that you're creating. So you'll want to go back to your written instructions and take a look at the end of the 9th round, that paragraph. It says to repeat the last round until motif measures approximately, and then it has the sizes. They're listed in order of the size that you're creating. So I mentioned I'm working on the small size. I'm going to crochet my motifs until they measure approximately 18 inches by 18 inches. And you're just going to go off of the size that you're creating. The other thing to keep in mind is we're going to be alternating colors just like we have been. So we're going to be going A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D. And you want to keep up that same pattern until you're finished with your motif. Now, once you finish one of your motifs, of course, probably a good idea to weave in your ends if you have any of those, and then move on to the next. We need a total of 4 motifs in order to finish up our cardigans. And then once you come back to the video, we'll talk about the assembly, the cuffs, and the ribbing. Once you have crocheted all 4 of your squares and you're ready to move on to the assembly, I do have one more little tip for you before you move on, and that is to block your squares. Now you can see here I have 2 blocked squares, and the edges are completely flat and straight. The points are very nice, and you'll notice it doesn't have that granny square lean, but believe me, these were not perfect before I blocked them. So I do highly recommend you block your project before you move on to the assembly. If you need some information on that, I do have a tutorial that goes in depth on blocking. There's a few different methods that you can use, and you can find that tutorial at bhookedcrochet.com/blockyourproject. Now, once you do that and you're ready to begin the assembly, what you'll need to do is we'll just start out with 2 of our squares. So the end goal here is that we're going to have all 4 of our squares together. So 2 side by side, and then 2, of course, on top of that. Right now, we can only fit these 2 in the frame, but I would just recommend that you refer to your written instructions. It's going to show you exactly how you need to lay these out. And what I want to demonstrate for you now is how to do the flat seam or a flat seam in order to sew these together. Now this is just one technique, the technique that I use personally. I find it the easiest, but you can use any joining method that you choose. So what I need for you to do is grab a cut of yarn. Mine is just a couple of feet long, and I'm just going to start out with a small cut so it's easier to work with. And also you'll want to use the color of the round that you ended on. That's going to help keep our seam invisible. So we'll begin by just taking your darning needle and working it into the corners. And what I like to do is just take the end of that and tie it off. That way I don't pull it through accidentally. Just gives it a little more security. And then of course you can weave this in later on. Now the way I like to do a flat seam is just work back and forth. So I'm going to work under both stitches in this direction, and then I'm going to come back and work in the next stitch in this direction here. The main thing that you want to keep in mind is that you're working on the same stitch on each side of your squares. If you get to the point where you're off several stitches, then you're not going to have a clean edge on the other side. So locate your first stitch, and you can start in any direction that you'd like. And just work your needle under both of those stitches and pull through. And then locate your second stitch, work your darning needle under that on both sides, and pull it through in the opposite direction. This part's really simple. That's all you're going to have to do is repeat this. You're going to want to work this for all of the seams. We'll have a total of, we'll have one long vertical seam, we'll have one long horizontal seam. So what I would recommend, just go ahead and work up this seam right here, and then add your other 2, and then continue. Now once you do that, there is one other step to our assembly that we'll cover before we get into the ribbing. Now once you have all 4 of your squares sewn together, the next step in the assembly is to fold it in half with the wrong side facing up. So this is the wrong side of one of my squares, and you want to orient it so that your fold is up here at the top. So down at the bottom is the opening. What we're going to do in this section is create the armholes, and we need to do that. We need to have a couple of supplies. We're going to use a tape measure and a couple of stitch markers. I prefer to use these locking stitch markers for something like this because it's going to hold the work together. It's not going to fall out. If you don't have stitch markers on hand, you can use a scrap piece of yarn and you can just tie it together. So we want to measure 8 inches down, and that's where we're going to place our stitch marker. So this opening right here, this is going to be the armhole. So we're not going to stitch anything right there. We're going to leave that open. The next part that we need to sew is down here at the bottom. So you'll start down here at this opening. We're going to leave this bottom part open too. We just want to sew from here up to our stitch marker. So go ahead and repeat that on the other side. You'll measure 8 inches down from the fold, place your stitch marker. Then what I need for you to do is sew up from that bottom corner up to your stitch marker. The next thing we're going to focus on is the cuffs. So what I need for you to do is just pick one of your armholes, and that's where we're going to be working. We're going to need color A, and we're just going to fasten on just at our seam. So this is where I sewed the 2 sides together. I'm just going to fasten on right there next to that seam. Now the instructions tell us to make 56 single crochet even all the way around. Now you may have to do a little bit of counting, depends on how accurate your measurements were, depends on the size of the square that you have. What I would recommend is that you count first. So just go through and count and just take a mental note of where you would place these single crochets in order for you to have an even 56 when you get to this other side. Once you figure out the best way to place your stitches, then you're just going to just single crochet around the edge. And what we're doing here is just creating a foundation for the cuff that we're creating. So I found that, at least with my measurements, what works for me is if I make 3 single crochets into one group, so 1 into every stitch, then of course get that chain space, and then 2 in the next group. And if I alternate that, it gets me really close to 56 when I reach the other side. So that's what I'm doing here. Go ahead and finish up this first round of the cuff. We'll focus in on this cuff first, and then you can go ahead and work on your second cuff. Once you've made it back to the other side, we're just going to join with a slip stitch to that first single crochet. And then we'll just jump right into round 2. We're going to chain 3, and that's going to count as a double crochet. And this round is very simple. We're just going to make 1 double crochet into every one of the single crochets that we just made. And once you've made it to the end of round 2, you're just going to join with a slip stitch to that third chain. Now to move on to round 3 and 4, they're actually the same. They're spelled out a little bit differently because of how we start them. Here is where we're going to start creating that ribbing pattern. So we want to begin both rounds 3 and 4 with a chain 2. We're going to locate our next double crochet. What we want to do here is make a front post double crochet. So what that means is that instead of working into the V up here like we're used to, we're going to work the stitch around the post. So we're going to pull the post to the front. That's where it gets its name. So we're just going to yarn over like normal, and then just put your hook behind the post. And then finish your double crochet as normal, and as you'll see, that's going to pull the post up to the front. Now in order to create a ribbing pattern, we often as designers will use an alternating front post and back post double crochet. So the back post double crochet is the exact same concept. The only difference is the direction that the post is going to be going in. So instead of pulling it to the front like this, we want to pull it to the back. And we have to get to it by working our hooks behind and catching the post that way. So that's what it looks like from this side. On the back side, of course, you can see the post back there. So the back post double crochet is quite a bit more awkward than the front post, but as you do this stitch, you'll start to get the hang of it and you'll find your rhythm. So the repeat of this round is front post double crochet, back post double crochet. So I've just done my front post, now my back post, and front post, and back post. And we just want to repeat that until we reach the other side. So hopefully if you have been doing everything correctly, you should end up so that your last stitch is a back post double crochet and you're going to be working it around that chain 3. Now if that's not the case for you, there a couple of things could have occurred. One, you could not have 56 stitches total. So with this stitch pattern, we have to have an even number in order for the math to work out. The other problem, if you know that you have 56 stitches, is just double check and make sure you have all of your front post and back post double crochets in the correct place. Now before we can begin our final round for the cuff, we just want to join with a slip stitch to our first front post double crochet. And now round 4 is really simple. It's a pretty much the same stitch, well, it is the same stitch pattern, but it looks a little bit different since we have our stitches here to work into. So we'll make our chain 1. We're just going to continue in that same repeat. So front post double crochet around the first one, back post double crochet around the next. So wherever you see a front post double crochet, then you'll make another front post double crochet. Wherever there's a back post, you'll make a back post double crochet. And that's all there is to round 4. And this is the final round for our cuff. So once we reach the end, we're going to fasten off, and then you'll want to go ahead and do the same thing on the other side for the other cuff. And once you've made it back to the end of the round, you're just going to join with a slip stitch to your first front post double crochet. And from here we can fasten off. And let's do the same thing on the other side. Finish up your second cuff, and then we'll cover the ribbing, and our cardigans will be complete at that point. So the next thing that we want to draw our attention to is the ribbing section on our written instructions. And we're going to do this very much in the same way that we worked the cuff just now. Instead of having a total of 56 stitches that we're going to spread out evenly for the opening, we're going to have to determine, which size we created, and that's going to tell us how many stitches we need to work evenly around the entire opening of the cardigan. So this is the bottom opening. We're going to fasten on at the center in the back seam. So you're going to find the back of your work. You're going to fasten on in this seam here. So I would just recommend in the chain space. Depending on the size that you're creating, now I've mentioned I'm working on the small size, so I'm going to work a total of 256 single crochet evenly around the entire front opening. And that's this entire circle that we're working with here. Now, if you're working on one of the other sizes, it's going to be 266 or 280. So that's what I need for you to do at this point. We're going to work that in the same way that we did for the cuffs, so we don't need to cover it here. Fasten on, work your even number of single crochet stitches for this foundation. We're going to be working in the same ribbing pattern that we did for the cuffs. So really the only difference here is the number of stitches and the size of the opening that we're working with. Now once you've made it all the way around, you're going to join with the slip stitch to your first single crochet. And again, this is all just a review. Actually, the ribbing on this opening part is exactly the same that we just covered for the cuff. So rounds 1 is the same with the exception of the number of stitches. Rounds 2, 3, and 4 are also the same. So we're not going to cover them again here. We've actually just covered them. Since everything from here on out for this ribbing section is an exact repeat of what we did for the cuff, I'm going to quickly go through the rounds just talking to you here, and I'm going to allow you to go ahead and finish crocheting up your ribbing, your other cuff if you haven't done so already, and that's going to wrap up our tutorial on the Coziest Crochet Cardigan. So what we've done here is round number 1 of our ribbing. I do have a little tip for you. Now the instructions do give you a specific number that you're supposed to meet, so you have a total number of stitches from when you start to where you finish. Now, a little piece of advice, if you're having some trouble evenly distributing those stitches, really the main goal is that you have an even number. So if you're off by a little bit of what the pattern tells you, it's really not a big deal as long as you keep it in an even number. Round 2 is going to be a round where you make 1 double crochet into every stitch. You'll just do that all the way around. Join with a slip stitch to your 3rd chain. Round 3, you're going to start your front post and back post double crochets just like we did before. And then round 4, you're going to continue that front post and back post double crochet, alternating all the way around. You'll join with your first front post double crochet at the end of each of those rounds. Now we're going to take the ribbing just a step further because we want it to be longer than the cuffs. And the instructions tell us that after we've completed round 4, what we want to do is just continue to repeat round 4 until our ribbing measures 6 inches long. So once we have made it to that point, then we can fasten off, weave in all of our ends, and our cardigans are complete. Thank you so much for sticking with me to the end here. I know we took up a lot